Thank you very much for inviting me to contribute. And absolutely, I think there's a really interesting sort of correlation between the desire for being able to prove the authenticity of the asset that you've acquired, the digital asset. And also, I think there's also a real strong desire to participate actively in the sort of the nascent community building that Regie sort of mentioned there, the idea of getting in sort of nice and early and building those relationships that you may not normally have built in the sort of the three-dimensional in real life collecting scene. So, I mean, we can talk a little bit more about this later on if you'd like, but there is a real sense of community, and that community can come through many different ways and different sort of articulations, but essentially being someone who is an owner of an asset or an NFT that you can then share with other people, but also at the same time it might also offer up some form of utility in itself by the very nature of you being part of the owner collective of that particular asset. So you might actually, for instance, be invited to a private view, or you might be invited to a particular location or a particular special event just by the very nature of you being an owner of that asset. So I think that's really, really an interesting area that a lot of collectors are starting to consider. But not to say that shall we say, traditional art is anywhere away from being as popular, but I would say that the NFTs are certainly, they're piquing the interest of forward-thinking collectors right now, which is, I think, an interesting area for future development.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned about community and that circle you're part of when you own a certain NFT or a certain crypto art piece. So that's not usual in traditional art, is it? It's very opaque in traditional art, in the traditional art scene. Am I right?
That's definitely one criticism that I think is often leveled at the traditional art trade. To some degree, it's true, but there is also, if you are a collector of works in the traditional art trade, there is also a sense of community. Just that sense of community, I think, is probably hidden a little bit more behind kind of social nuances and impenetrable walls. Whereas in the crypto sphere, what you have in the NFT communities, you do actually have a real transparency because it's very, very easy to identify who the owner of, an edition of 20 NFTs might be. You just obviously just go to Etherscan or thereabouts, and you can find out what that wallet address is. So it's sort of there's a lot less hiding going on. Although the irony of the whole thing is that our wallets are anonymized by their very nature, so we can find out who the person is, who the wallet address is, but not perhaps their personality unless they want to disclose that. So I think there's that sort of that sense of circularity within the NFT collector community. Is much more fluid and much more collaborative. I think collaborative is probably a key point here. It's less about I've got, it's more about perhaps would you also like to acquire kind of thing. But being part of that sense of sort of social construction, I think is really, really interesting.
I couldn't agree more. So I hear it also very often. There is exactly a community for NFTs and not a traditional word, but I couldn't agree more. So there is really also the community and traditional, which is much more hidden than in the NFT space. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.